Before we begin our journey tonight, I would like to ask you to please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like if you are enjoying it. Your support helps me create more of these peaceful bedtime stories for you. I would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. It makes our community feel more connected, knowing we are all sharing this quiet moment together across the world. Now, let us begin. Find yourself a comfortable position, whether you are lying in bed or sitting in your favorite chair. Allow your shoulders to drop away from your ears and feel your entire body beginning to settle into this moment of peace. Take a deep breath in through your nose and let it out slowly through your mouth. As you breathe, imagine yourself in a quiet, dimly lit room where the only sounds are the gentle rustling of parchment, the soft whisper of wind through ancient corridors, and the distant crackle of oil lamps casting warm, golden light against weathered stone walls. Feel the coolness of the evening air as it drifts through the space around you, carrying with it the faint scent of cedar and myrrh, and allow yourself to sink deeper into this tranquil sanctuary, where time moves slowly and peacefully. Our story tonight begins in the cradle of civilization itself, where the first cities rose from the fertile plains between two great rivers. Picture, if you will, the ancient land of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers wind their way through endless stretches of golden wheat and barley fields, their waters reflecting the pale light of dawn as farmers begin their daily routines that have remained unchanged for thousands of years. The year is approximately 2500 BCE, and the great city of Ur stands proudly on the horizon, its massive ziggurat reaching toward the heavens like a stepped mountain of sun-baked brick and bitumen. The morning mist rises gently from the river channels, carrying with it the soft sounds of water lapping against reed boats and the distant calls of ibis and cranes as they wade through the marshlands in search of their morning meal. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of the city, you would find yourself awakening not in a comfortable bed with soft linens, but on a simple reed mat placed upon a floor of packed earth and clay. The walls around you are thick and windowless, constructed from mud bricks that have been carefully shaped and dried under the relentless Mesopotamian sun. There are no glass windows to filter the light, only small openings near the ceiling that allow a gentle breeze to circulate through the dwelling, carrying with it the mingled scents of baking bread, burning incense, and the earthy aroma of the river that flows just beyond the city walls. The house itself is part of a complex network of narrow streets and alleyways, where families live in close proximity to one another, their daily lives intertwined in ways that would seem remarkably intimate to our modern sensibilities. Your first challenge of the day would be something as simple as getting dressed, but in ancient Mesopotamia, this was no simple task. The clothing available to you would depend entirely on your social status and occupation, with the wealthy adorning themselves in finely woven wool and linen garments dyed in rich purples and blues, while the common people wore simple, undyed tunics that reached to their knees. The process of creating these garments was long and laborious, requiring skilled artisans to card the wool, spin it into thread, and weave it on primitive looms that demanded both patience and expertise. Even the simplest garment represented weeks of work, making clothing a precious commodity that was carefully maintained and passed down through generations. As you wrap yourself in the rough wool of your tunic, you would feel the scratch of the coarse fibers against your skin, a constant reminder of the harsh realities of daily life in this ancient world. The matter of personal hygiene would present another significant challenge in your daily routine. There are no running water systems, no modern plumbing, and certainly no hot showers to start your day. Instead, you would rely on small clay vessels filled with water drawn from the communal wells or directly from the river, water that might be cloudy with sediment and require careful filtration through cloth or settling in large jars before it could be used safely. The process of washing your body would involve standing in a shallow basin and pouring the precious water over yourself with a small pitcher, being careful not to waste a single drop in this arid land where water is life itself. Soap, as we know it today, does not exist, so you would cleanse yourself with a mixture of plant oils and ash, creating a harsh but effective cleaning agent that would leave your skin feeling tight and sometimes irritated. The streets of yore would assault your senses in ways that would be overwhelming to someone accustomed to the relatively clean and ordered environment of the modern world. The narrow pathways between buildings are not paved with smooth stone or asphalt, but consist of packed earth that turns to thick, sucking mud during the rainy season and creates choking clouds of dust during the dry months. Mixed with this dust are the remnants of daily life, animal droppings from the donkeys, goats, and sheep that share the streets with humans, food scraps thrown from doorways, and the occasional dead animal that no one has yet removed. The smell would be a constant presence, a mixture of human and animal waste, cooking fires, metalworking furnaces, and the sweet, cloying scent of decomposition that hangs heavy in the warm air. As you make your way through these crowded streets, you would encounter the complex social hierarchy that governs every aspect of life in ancient Mesopotamia. At the top of this pyramid sits the king, believed to be chosen by the gods themselves and wielding absolute power over the lives and deaths of his subjects. Below him are the priests who control the massive temple complexes that dominate the city skyline and manage much of the agricultural land that feeds the population. The wealthy merchants and landowners occupy the next level, their fine houses and elaborate tombs testifying to their success in trade and agriculture. Below them are the skilled craftsmen, the potters, metalworkers, weavers, and scribes, whose expertise is essential to the functioning of the city, but who live in constant awareness of their dependence on the favor of those above them. The language barrier alone would present an insurmountable challenge to your daily survival. The people of Mesopotamia speak Sumerian and Akkadian, languages that bear no resemblance to any modern tongue, and are written in the complex cuneiform script that requires years of study to master. These wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets represent not just words but entire concepts, legal codes, religious beliefs, and commercial transactions that form the foundation of the world's first urban civilization. Without the ability to communicate effectively, you would find yourself unable to negotiate for food, shelter, or work, unable to understand the religious rituals that permeate daily life, and unable to navigate the complex social customs that govern every interaction between individuals. The food available to you would be both limited and challenging to obtain. The diet of the average Mesopotamian consists primarily of barley, wheat, dates, and onions, supplemented occasionally with small amounts of meat or fish for those who can afford such luxuries. Bread is the staple food, but it is coarse and gritty, often containing sand and other impurities that would wear down your teeth over time. The process of preparing even the simplest meal requires considerable skill and effort, from grinding grain into flour using stone querns to building and maintaining fires for cooking. Milk and cheese are available, but without refrigeration, they must be consumed quickly in the desert heat or processed into forms that can be stored for longer periods. The water you would drink poses its own set of challenges and dangers. The rivers that give life to Mesopotamia also carry with them the waste and runoff from the cities and villages upstream, creating a constant risk of waterborne diseases that could prove fatal in an age before antibiotics or modern medical understanding. The wealthy might have access to beer, which is safer to drink than water due to the brewing process. But for the common people, clean water is a precious commodity that must be carefully managed and conserved. Wells are dug deep into the earth, but they often become contaminated or run dry during the harsh summer months, forcing people to travel great distances to secure enough water for their family's daily needs. Your working life in ancient Mesopotamia would be determined entirely by the circumstances of your birth, with little opportunity for advancement or change throughout your lifetime. If you were born into a farming family, your days would begin before dawn with the laborious task of working the fields that stretch endlessly along the riverbanks. The tools available to you would be simple and primitive: wooden plows pulled by oxen, bronze sickles for harvesting grain, and irrigation channels that must be constantly maintained and cleared of debris. The work would be backbreaking under the relentless sun, your hands blistered and bleeding from handling rough tools and coarse grain stalks. During the planting season, you would spend your days bent over in the fields, carefully placing seeds in the furrows while praying to the gods for sufficient rainfall and protection from the locusts that could destroy an entire harvest in a matter of days. The irrigation system that makes agriculture possible in this arid land represents one of humanity's greatest early achievements, but maintaining it requires constant vigilance and cooperation among entire communities. The network of canals, dikes, and water gates must be cleaned regularly to prevent the accumulation of silt that would block the flow of precious water to the fields. During the annual flood season, when the rivers swell with snowmelt from distant mountains, you would join your neighbors in reinforcing the earthen barriers that protect the city from devastating floods. The work would be dangerous and exhausting, carried out in knee-deep mud under the scorching sun, with the constant threat that a breach in the system could wash away months of careful preparation and leave your family facing starvation in the coming year. If fate had placed you among the craftsmen of the city, your daily existence would revolve around the specialized skills passed down through generations of your family. The pottery workshop where you might spend your days would be filled with the constant sounds of hands shaping clay on primitive wheels, the scraping of tools against unfired vessels, and the roar of kilns heated with dried dung and wood. The clay itself would be dug from riverbanks and carefully prepared through a process of mixing, kneading, and aging that requires both physical strength and delicate touch. Your fingers would be permanently stained with clay, and your lungs filled with the fine dust that comes from working with dried earth, leading to the respiratory ailments that plague craftsmen throughout the ancient world. The finished pottery would be essential for daily life: storage jars for grain and oil, cooking vessels for preparing meals, and decorative items for the wealthy who could afford such luxuries. The metalworking shops present their own unique challenges and dangers that would test your endurance and skill. The Bronze Age technology available to Mesopotamian craftsmen requires the careful mixing of copper and tin, metals that must be heated to extreme temperatures in furnaces that glow white-hot and fill the workshop with choking smoke. The bellows used to maintain these temperatures must be operated continuously by hand, requiring the coordinated effort of multiple workers laboring in shifts throughout the day. The molten metal, when poured into stone molds, creates tools and weapons that are essential for agriculture and defense, but a single mistake in the process could result in severe burns or worse. The finished products, axes, spears, jewelry, and ceremonial objects, represent not just functional items, but symbols of the technological advancement that allows Mesopotamian civilization to flourish. Your relationship with the natural world would be one of constant struggle and adaptation to forces beyond your control. The climate of ancient Mesopotamia presents challenges that would test even the most resilient modern person, with summer temperatures that regularly exceed what we would consider safe for outdoor work. The sun beats down mercilessly on the flat plains, creating heat that radiates from the baked earth and makes even the simplest tasks exhausting. There is no air conditioning, no ice, and no escape from the oppressive heat, except for the brief respite that comes with nightfall. During the day, you would seek shelter in the thick-walled buildings that provide some protection from the sun, but even these structures become oppressively hot as the day progresses. The winter months bring their own set of challenges, with cold rains that turn the streets into rivers of mud and make travel between cities nearly impossible. The houses, built primarily for protection from heat rather than cold, offer little insulation against the chilly winds that sweep across the plains. Your only sources of warmth would be small braziers filled with burning charcoal or dried animal dung, creating smoke that fills the rooms and stings your eyes while providing minimal heat. The rain, when it comes, is often torrential and unpredictable, creating floods that can destroy crops and buildings with equal ease. The constant threat of these natural disasters would create a sense of vulnerability and dependence on divine favor that permeates every aspect of daily life. The medical knowledge available to treat illness and injury would be rudimentary at best, combining primitive surgical techniques with elaborate religious rituals designed to appease the gods believed to control health and disease. If you were to fall ill, your first recourse would be to one of the temple priests who serve as both spiritual advisors and medical practitioners. These priest-physicians would examine you carefully, but their understanding of anatomy and physiology would be limited to what could be observed externally. They might prescribe herbal remedies made from plants growing along the riverbanks, or recommend specific prayers and offerings to particular deities associated with healing. For more serious conditions, they might resort to procedures such as trepanation, the drilling of holes in the skull to release evil spirits, or the application of heated bronze instruments to burn away diseased tissue. The absence of anesthesia would make even minor surgical procedures excruciating ordeals that many patients would not survive. Pain management would consist primarily of alcohol or opium when available, but these substances would be expensive and difficult to obtain for common people. Broken bones would be set using primitive splints made from wood and cloth, often resulting in permanent deformities that would affect your ability to work and support your family. Infections, which could easily prove fatal, would be treated with poultices made from mud and herbs, creating conditions that often made the original problem worse rather than better. The legal system that governs daily life in Mesopotamia would be based on the famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest written legal codes, but one that reflects a harsh and unforgiving approach to justice. The principle of retribution, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, would govern most criminal proceedings, with punishments that seem barbaric by modern standards. If you were accused of a crime, there would be no presumption of innocence, no right to legal representation, and no appeal process. The testimony of witnesses would be weighed according to their social status, with the word of a nobleman carrying far more weight than that of a common farmer or craftsman. Physical evidence would be limited to what could be observed directly, and in cases where guilt could not be clearly established, you might be subjected to trial by ordeal, thrown into the river to see if the gods would allow you to survive, or forced to drink poison to determine your innocence. The punishments prescribed by the law would be swift and severe, designed more to serve as public examples than to rehabilitate offenders. Theft might result in the amputation of hands, adultery could lead to death by drowning, and even minor infractions could result in substantial fines that would impoverish your family for generations. The death penalty would be carried out in public, often using methods such as impalement or burning that were designed to maximize suffering and serve as warnings to others. There would be no prisons as we understand them today, no probation system, and no concept of rehabilitation or second chances for those who violated the established order. The religious obligations that permeate daily life would require constant attention and significant portions of your limited resources. The gods of Mesopotamia are numerous and demanding, each requiring specific rituals, offerings, and forms of worship that must be performed correctly to maintain their favor. The great ziggurat that dominates the city skyline would be the center of religious life, but it would also represent a constant drain on the community's resources through the taxes and labor required for its construction and maintenance. The priests who serve in these temples would wield enormous power over the daily lives of ordinary people, determining everything from when to plant crops to whom you might marry. Your personal relationship with the divine would be one of fear and supplication rather than comfort and guidance. The gods of Mesopotamia are portrayed as capricious and often cruel, capable of destroying entire cities on a whim or visiting plagues upon innocent people simply because they have been insufficiently honored. Every natural disaster, every personal misfortune, every illness or death would be interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure that must be addressed through increased offerings and more elaborate rituals. The uncertainty of divine favor would create a constant state of anxiety and concern that would color every decision you make throughout your life. The education system available to you in ancient Mesopotamia would be reserved for a privileged few, with literacy considered a specialized skill rather than a basic human right. If you were fortunate enough to be born into a wealthy family or selected for training as a scribe, your education would begin at a young age in the temple schools, where young boys would spend long hours learning to read and write the complex cuneiform script. The process of mastering this writing system would require years of patient practice, beginning with simple exercises copying the same symbols over and over on clay tablets until your fingers ached and your eyes burned from the strain. The clay tablets themselves would be heavy and awkward to handle, requiring careful preparation before each lesson and precise pressure to create the wedge-shaped marks that form the foundation of written communication. The curriculum in these schools would focus primarily on practical skills needed for administration and commerce, with students learning to calculate taxes, record grain distributions, and maintain the complex records that keep the city functioning. Mathematics would be taught using a base 60 system that would seem completely foreign to modern students, requiring you to memorize multiplication tables and perform calculations without the aid of written numerals as we know them today. The clay tablets used for practice would be expensive to produce and difficult to transport, making mistakes costly and creating enormous pressure to achieve perfection on the first attempt. Your teachers would be stern and demanding, using physical punishment to enforce discipline and ensure that students showed proper respect for the knowledge being transmitted. The vast majority of the population would remain illiterate throughout their lives, dependent on the small class of educated scribes for all written communication. If you were among the common people, your knowledge would be transmitted orally through stories, songs, and practical demonstrations passed down through generations. This oral tradition would be rich and complex, containing the accumulated wisdom of centuries, but it would also be fragile and subject to change over time. Without the ability to read or write, you would be completely dependent on others for understanding legal contracts, religious texts, and government decrees that might affect your daily life in profound ways. The entertainment available to you would be limited to forms that could be produced locally without sophisticated technology or materials. Music would be performed on simple instruments crafted from wood, reed, and animal hide, creating melodies that would be haunting and beautiful but limited in range and complexity. The lyre, with its gentle strings stretched across a wooden frame, would provide accompaniment for singers who preserve the epic tales of heroes and gods in lengthy performances that could last for hours. These performances would serve not just as entertainment, but as important vehicles for transmitting cultural values and historical knowledge from one generation to the next. Dancing would be an integral part of religious and social celebrations, with elaborate rituals performed in temple courtyards and private homes during festivals and important life events. The movements would be stylized and symbolic, representing the agricultural cycles that govern daily life or the mythological stories that explain the origins of the world. Participants would wear simple costumes made from dyed wool and leather, adorned with jewelry crafted from bronze and precious stones when available. The physical demands of these performances would be considerable, requiring strength and endurance that would challenge even the most athletic modern person. Your housing situation would present constant challenges related to comfort, privacy, and safety that would test your ability to adapt to primitive living conditions. The typical Mesopotamian house would be built around a central courtyard that serves as the heart of family life, providing light and ventilation for the surrounding rooms. The walls would be thick and windowless, constructed from sun-dried mud, bricks that provide excellent insulation against heat but offer little protection against determined intruders. The flat roof would serve as additional living space during the cooler months, but it would require constant maintenance to prevent leaks during the rainy season. The interior of your home would be sparse and functional, with furniture limited to what could be crafted locally from available materials. Your bed would consist of a simple wooden frame strung with leather strips or rope, covered with woven mats and perhaps a single wool blanket during the colder months. Storage would be provided by large clay jars embedded in the floor, used to hold grain, oil, and other necessities that must be carefully protected from rodents and insects. The floors themselves would be made of packed earth mixed with straw, creating a surface that is dusty when dry and muddy when wet, requiring constant sweeping and maintenance to remain even minimally clean. Privacy, as we understand it today, would be virtually non-existent in the crowded quarters where extended families live together in close proximity. The sounds of daily life, conversations, arguments, cooking, and even intimate moments would be audible throughout the dwelling and to neighbors living just a few feet away. Personal space would be a luxury that few could afford with sleeping. Arrangements determined by age, gender, and social status rather than personal preference. The lack of individual rooms would mean that personal belongings would be minimal and carefully guarded, stored in small chests or baskets that could be moved as needed. The transportation available to you would be limited to walking, riding donkeys, or traveling by boat along the rivers that serve as the highways of ancient Mesopotamia. Roads, where they exist at all, would be nothing more than worn paths through the desert that become impassable during sandstorms or seasonal floods. A journey that might take hours in a modern vehicle would require days or weeks of difficult travel with constant dangers from bandits, wild animals, and the harsh desert environment. The boats used for river travel would be simple reed vessels that require constant bailing to prevent sinking, and navigation would depend entirely on the skill and experience of the boatman. Long distance travel would be undertaken only when absolutely necessary, as the risks and costs would be prohibitive for most people. Merchants who brave the dangerous routes between cities would travel in well-armed caravans, carrying goods that are valuable enough to justify the enormous expenses and risks involved. The pack animals used for overland transport would be loaded with supplies needed for the journey itself, leaving limited space for trade goods and personal belongings. The pace of travel would be dictated by the animals and the terrain, with frequent stops required for rest, water, and protection from the elements. The concept of time in ancient Mesopotamia would be fundamentally different from our modern understanding, based on natural cycles rather than mechanical precision. Your daily schedule would be determined by the position of the sun, the phases of the moon, and the seasonal flooding of the rivers rather than by clocks and calendars. The working day would begin at sunrise and end at sunset, with the length of the day varying significantly throughout the year. There would be no concept of weekends or vacation time, as the demands of agricultural life require constant attention throughout the growing season. The measurement of longer periods would be based on astronomical observations made by priest astronomers, who track the movements of celestial bodies with remarkable accuracy. The calendar would be lunar-based, requiring frequent adjustments to keep it synchronized with the solar year and the agricultural cycles that govern daily life. Religious festivals and important civic events would be scheduled according to these celestial calculations, creating a rhythm of life that is closely tied to the natural world, but completely foreign to someone accustomed to the regular, predictable schedule of modern life. Your social relationships would be governed by complex, networks of family obligations, religious duties, and economic dependencies that would limit your freedom to choose your own path in life. Marriage would be arranged by your parents based on economic and social considerations rather than personal attraction or compatibility. The ceremony itself would be primarily a legal and economic transaction, with elaborate contracts specifying the dowry, property rights, and responsibilities of both parties. Love, while not unknown, would be considered less important than the practical considerations of creating alliances between families and ensuring the continuation of bloodlines. The role of women in Mesopotamian society would be severely restricted, with legal rights and social freedoms that would seem oppressive by modern standards. Women would be considered the property of their fathers and later their husbands, with little control over their own lives or destinies. Their primary value would be their ability to produce male heirs who could carry on the family name and inherit property. Education would be denied to most women, keeping them dependent on male relatives for all interactions with the broader world. Even wealthy women would live lives of relative seclusion, their activities limited to the domestic sphere and closely supervised by male. Family members. The children in your family would be expected to contribute to the household economy from an early age, with boys learning their father's trade and girls helping with domestic duties. Child mortality would be high, with many families losing multiple children to disease, accident, or malnutrition before they reached adulthood. The survivors would be tough and resilient, but they would also carry the physical and emotional scars of a harsh childhood that would shape their entire lives. Education, when available at all, would focus on practical skills rather than intellectual development, preparing children for lives of manual labor and economic uncertainty. The seasonal cycles that govern life in ancient Mesopotamia would demand a level of physical endurance and mental resilience that would challenge even the most prepared modern person. During the spring flooding season, when the rivers swell with melted snow from distant mountains, your entire community would mobilize to manage the life-giving waters that make agriculture possible in this arid land. The timing of these floods would be crucial but unpredictable, requiring constant vigilance and the ability to respond quickly when the waters begin to rise. You would spend long days reinforcing dikes and channels, your hands raw and bleeding from handling rough stone and earth, while the fate of your entire year's food supply hangs in the balance. The planting season that follows would demand backbreaking labor under the increasingly intense sun, as every available person works to get seeds into the ground before the soil becomes too dry and hard to cultivate. The primitive tools available to you would make this work exhausting and time-consuming, requiring multiple passes over the same ground to achieve what modern machinery could accomplish in a fraction of the time. Your back would ache from bending. Over the furrows, your hands would be blistered and cut from handling rough wooden implements, and your skin would be burned dark by the relentless exposure to the desert sun. The pressure to complete the planting on schedule would be immense, as any delay could mean starvation for your family in the coming year. The long summer months would bring their own unique challenges, as temperatures soar to levels that would be considered dangerous by modern standards. The heat would be oppressive and inescapable, radiating from the baked earth and creating an atmosphere that makes even the simplest tasks exhausting. Your work would need to be scheduled around the worst heat of the day, beginning before dawn and resuming in the late afternoon when the temperature becomes barely tolerable. The irrigation channels that bring water to your crops would need constant maintenance during this period, as the rapid evaporation and the accumulation of salt deposits threaten to destroy the delicate system that makes agriculture possible. The harvest season would be a time of both celebration and anxiety, as months of hard work finally come to fruition, but the success or failure of the crop determines whether your family will survive the coming year. The work would be intensive and time-sensitive, requiring the entire community to labor together from dawn to dusk to bring in the grain before it spoils in the field. The primitive sickles and scythes available would make the work slow and dangerous, with the constant risk of serious cuts that could become infected in the hot, dusty conditions. Your hands would be torn and bleeding from handling the rough grain stalks, and your lungs would be filled with chaff and dust that makes breathing difficult. The storage and processing of the harvested grain would present additional challenges that require both skill and careful planning. The grain must be carefully dried and cleaned before it can be stored in the large clay jars that line the walls of your home. And even the smallest mistake in this process could result in spoilage that would leave your family facing starvation. The threshing process, which separates the grain from the stalks, would be done by hand or with the help of oxen trampling the grain on specially prepared floors. The work would be dusty and exhausting, requiring constant attention to ensure that the precious grain is not lost or contaminated. The craft production that supplements agricultural income would require specialized skills that take years to master, and physical stamina that would challenge even the strongest modern person. The pottery workshops where you might work would be filled with the constant sounds of wheels turning and kilns firing, creating an environment that is both physically demanding and mentally exhausting. The clay must be prepared through a laborious process of mixing, kneading, and aging that requires both strength and patience. Your hands would be permanently stained and cracked from constant contact with the clay, and your back would ache from long hours hunched over the pottery wheel. The firing process that transforms clay into usable pottery would be dangerous and unpredictable, requiring careful temperature control and timing that depends entirely on experience and intuition. The kilns would be heated with wood and dried animal dung, creating intense heat and choking smoke that makes working conditions nearly unbearable. A single mistake in the firing process could destroy weeks of work, making each firing a nerve-wracking experience that determines whether your family will have income for the coming months. The finished pottery would need to be carefully inspected for flaws and defects that could make it unusable, with imperfect pieces representing not just wasted materials but lost time and effort. The textile production that provides clothing and household goods would be equally demanding, requiring skills that modern people would find difficult to master. The process begins with the raising of sheep and goats, animals that must be carefully tended and fed throughout the year to produce wool of acceptable quality. The shearing process would be done by hand with bronze shears, requiring strength and skill to remove the fleece without injuring the animal. The wool would then need to be cleaned, sorted, and prepared for spinning, a process that involves removing dirt, burrs, and other debris that could contaminate the Finished product. The spinning and weaving processes would be time-consuming and physically demanding, requiring hours of repetitive motion that would strain your hands, arms, and back. The spinning wheel would be a simple device that requires constant attention and skill to produce thread of consistent quality and thickness. The weaving process would be done on primitive looms that require both hands and feet to operate, creating a complex rhythm of movements that must be maintained for hours at a time. The finished cloth would be coarse and rough compared to modern textiles, requiring additional processing to make it suitable for clothing. The dyeing process that adds color to textiles would involve the use of natural materials that must be carefully prepared and applied to achieve consistent results. The dyes would be made from plants, minerals, and insects that must be gathered at specific times and processed, using techniques that have been passed down through generations. The mordants used to fix the dyes would be harsh chemicals that could cause skin irritation and respiratory problems, making the dyeing process both dangerous and unpleasant. The finished textiles would fade quickly in the intense desert sun, requiring frequent re-dyeing to maintain their appearance. The metalworking that produces tools and weapons would present unique challenges that combine physical danger with technical complexity. The furnaces used to melt bronze would need to be carefully constructed and maintained, requiring a deep understanding of fire management and temperature control. The bellows used to maintain the high temperatures would need to be operated continuously by hand, creating a physically demanding job that requires multiple workers laboring in shifts. The molten metal would be extremely dangerous to handle, with the constant risk of severe burns or worse from splashes or spills. The forging process that shapes heated metal into useful objects would require strength, skill, and precise timing that comes only with years of experience. The hammers and anvils used would be heavy and awkward, requiring careful coordination to strike the metal at exactly the right moment and with the correct force. The heat from the forge would be intense and exhausting, making the work nearly unbearable during the summer months. The finished products would need to be carefully tested and refined, with defective items representing not just wasted materials, but potential danger to the users. The trade relationships that bring exotic goods to Mesopotamia would involve journeys and negotiations that would test your ability to survive in hostile environments and deal with unfamiliar cultures. The merchants who brave the dangerous routes between cities would face constant threats from bandits, wild animals, and the harsh desert environment. The goods they carry would be valuable but fragile, requiring careful packing and protection from the elements. The negotiations required to complete successful trades would depend on language skills, cultural knowledge, and personal relationships that take years to develop. The financial system that governs trade and commerce would be based on barter and credit arrangements that would seem impossibly complex by modern standards. The value of goods would be determined by supply and demand, seasonal variations, and the negotiating skills of the parties involved. There would be no standardized currency, no banks to provide credit, and no insurance to protect against losses. The risks involved in trade would be enormous, with the potential for complete financial ruin always present. The successful merchants would be those who combined business acumen with physical courage and the ability to adapt to rapidly changing Circumstances. The political situation that affects daily life would be unstable and dangerous, with constant threats from neighboring city-states and internal conflicts between different social groups. The king's power would depend on his ability to maintain control over the army and the priesthood, creating a delicate balance that could shift suddenly and dramatically. Wars would be frequent and brutal, with entire populations sometimes enslaved or killed when cities fall to enemy forces. The military service required of all able-bodied men would be dangerous and disruptive, taking farmers and craftsmen away from their productive work at critical times throughout the year. The worship practices that dominate daily life in ancient Mesopotamia would require a level of devotion and sacrifice that would seem overwhelming to modern sensibilities. Your relationship with the gods would be one of constant supplication and fear, as these divine beings are portrayed as powerful but capricious entities who must be appeased through elaborate rituals and costly offerings. The great ziggurat that towers over the city would be the focal point of religious life, but it would also represent a constant drain on your family's limited resources through the taxes and tribute required to maintain the temple complex. The priests who serve in these sacred spaces would wield enormous power over every aspect of daily life, determining when crops should be planted, when marriages should be performed, and how disputes should be resolved. The daily rituals that mark the passage of time would begin before dawn, with prayers and offerings to the household gods, who protect your family from the countless dangers that threaten daily existence. These small clay figurines would be carefully tended and honored with small gifts of food, oil, and incense, creating a constant expense that strains your already limited budget. The morning ablutions would involve elaborate cleansing rituals that purify your body and spirit for the day ahead, using precious water and oils that must be carefully conserved in this arid environment. The prayers themselves would be long and complex, recited in the ancient Sumerian language that few common people fully understand, but which tradition demands be preserved exactly as it was handed down from the gods themselves. The temple festivals that punctuate the calendar year would be magnificent spectacles that bring the entire community together in celebration and worship, but they would also require enormous sacrifices of time, labor, and resources from every family in the city. The preparation for these festivals would begin weeks in advance, with elaborate processions, ritual dramas, and sacrificial ceremonies that demand the participation of the entire population. Your family would be expected to contribute grain, livestock, and crafted goods to the temple treasury, offerings that represent a significant portion of your annual income, but which are considered essential for maintaining the favor of the gods who control the flooding of the rivers and the success of the harvest. The sacrificial rituals that form the heart of religious worship would be both magnificent and disturbing, involving the slaughter of valuable animals in ceremonies designed to please the gods and ensure their continued protection of the community. The temple courtyards would run red with blood during these ceremonies, as priests skilled in the ancient arts of divination examined the entrails of sacrificed animals for signs of divine favor or displeasure. The smell of burning flesh and incense would fill the air, creating an atmosphere that is both sacred and overwhelming to modern sensibilities. The meat from these sacrifices would be distributed to the community, providing rare protein for families who normally subsist on grain and vegetables. But the cost of providing these animals would fall heavily on the farmers and herders, who can least afford such expenses. The omens and portents that guide important decisions would be interpreted by priest diviners, who claim the ability to read the will of the gods in everything from the flight patterns of birds to the shape of oil drops on water. These divination practices would affect every aspect of your life, from the timing of agricultural activities to the selection of marriage partners, creating a world where personal choice is subordinated to divine will as interpreted by religious authorities. The consultation fees charged by these diviners would be substantial, but the social pressure to seek their guidance before making important decisions would be irresistible. The predictions they offer would often be cryptic and ambiguous, requiring additional consultations and payments to clarify their meaning. The afterlife beliefs that shape daily behavior would be based on a grim vision of death as a journey to a dark underworld where the spirits of the dead exist in a shadowy half-life of perpetual hunger and thirst. This bleak conception of what awaits after death would create a culture focused on achieving success and recognition in this life rather than preparing for rewards in the next. The elaborate burial practices reserved for the wealthy would involve the interment of valuable goods, furniture, and even servants who are killed to accompany their masters into the afterlife. The common people would face a much simpler burial, often in simple graves beneath the floors of their own homes, with few possessions to ease their journey to the underworld. The magical practices that supplement religious worship would involve a complex array of spells, charms, and protective rituals designed to ward off the demons and evil spirits that are believed to cause illness, misfortune, and death. Your home would be filled with amulets and talismans crafted from clay, bronze, and precious stones, each designed to protect against specific threats or to attract the favor of particular gods. The preparation of these protective items would require the services of skilled craftsmen who charge substantial fees for their expertise, creating another drain on your family's resources. The incantations and spells that activate these magical protections would need to be performed regularly and correctly, requiring memorization of complex formulae in ancient languages that few people fully understand. The social hierarchies that govern every interaction would be rigidly enforced through complex codes of behavior that dictate how people of different classes should dress, speak, and conduct themselves in public. Your clothing, hairstyle, and even the way you walk would immediately identify your social status to everyone you encounter, creating a world where personal identity is largely determined by birth rather than individual achievement. The penalties for violating these social codes would be severe, ranging from public humiliation to physical punishment, or even death for the most serious infractions. The constant awareness of your place in the social order would create a psychological burden that affects every aspect of daily life, from the deference you must show to superiors to the respect you can expect from those below you. The economic relationships that bind the community together would be based on personal loyalty and mutual obligation rather than abstract concepts of market value or individual rights. Your livelihood would depend not just on your skills and work ethic, but on your ability to maintain good relationships with patrons customers, and neighbors who control access to resources and opportunities. The breakdown of these personal relationships could lead to economic disaster, as there would be no social safety net to protect you from the consequences of unemployment, illness, or other misfortunes. The constant need to maintain these relationships would create social pressures that limit personal freedom and require careful attention to political and social currents that might affect your standing in the community. The knowledge systems that guide daily life would be based on tradition and religious authority rather than empirical observation and experimentation. The agricultural techniques passed down through generations would be considered sacred and unchangeable, making innovation difficult and dangerous. The medical knowledge available would combine practical remedies with magical thinking, creating treatments that might help in some cases but could be harmful in others. The astronomical observations that guide the calendar would be accurate, but interpreted through a lens of religious belief that sees celestial events as messages from the gods, rather than natural phenomena that can be understood through reason and observation. The technological limitations that constrain daily life would create challenges that modern people would find nearly impossible to overcome. The absence of mechanical power would mean that all work must be done by human or animal muscle, making even simple tasks exhausting and time-consuming. The lack of precision tools would limit the quality and consistency of manufactured goods, creating a world where perfection is rare and valuable. The primitive transportation systems would make travel slow and dangerous, limiting contact with distant places and ideas. The communication systems based on written messages carried by human runners would be slow and unreliable, making coordination of large projects difficult and creating opportunities for misunderstanding and conflict. The environmental challenges that threaten daily survival would be constant and unpredictable, from the sandstorms that can bury entire settlements to the floods that can destroy years of careful work in a matter of hours. The desert environment would be hostile to human life, with extreme temperatures, limited water supplies, and dangerous wildlife that pose constant threats to unwary travelers. The agricultural land that supports the population would be fragile and easily damaged by overcultivation or changes in the river systems that bring life-giving water to the fields. The constant struggle against these environmental forces would create a culture that is both resilient and fatalistic, accepting hardship as an inevitable part of life, while working constantly to minimize its impact. The warfare that periodically devastates the region would be brutal and total, with entire populations sometimes enslaved or killed when cities fall to enemy forces. The military technology available would be primitive but effective, with bronze weapons and simple siege engines that can breach even the strongest fortifications given sufficient time and determination. The soldiers who fight these wars would be farmers and craftsmen pressed into service with little training and poor equipment that makes survival largely a matter of luck rather than skill. The aftermath of warfare would bring famine, disease, and social disruption that can take generations to overcome, creating cycles of violence and revenge that perpetuate conflict across the generations. The administrative systems that govern daily life would be complex and bureaucratic, requiring constant interaction with officials who control everything from water rights to trade permits. The records kept by these administrators would be detailed and comprehensive, but they would also be written in languages and scripts that most people cannot read, creating dependence on a small class of educated scribes who charge substantial fees for their services. The legal procedures that govern disputes would be formal and lengthy, often requiring months or years to resolve even simple conflicts. The corruption that inevitably develops in these systems would create additional costs and delays that fall most heavily on those who can least afford them. Intellectual isolation that defines daily life in ancient Mesopotamia would create a world where knowledge is scarce, precious, and closely guarded by those who possess it. The vast libraries that we take for granted today would be replaced by small collections of clay tablets housed in temple complexes and royal palaces, accessible only to the educated elite who can read the complex cuneiform script. The ideas and discoveries that form the foundation of human civilization would be trapped within these narrow circles, unable to spread quickly or reach the common people who might benefit from them. Your understanding of the world would be limited to what you can observe directly, combined with the oral traditions passed down through your family and the religious teachings provided by the temple priests. The scientific knowledge available would be a mixture of accurate observation and supernatural explanation, creating a worldview that would seem both familiar and strange to modern minds. The astronomical observations made by temple astronomers would be remarkably precise, allowing them to predict eclipses and track the movements of planets with impressive accuracy. However, these observations would be interpreted through a lens of religious belief that sees celestial events as messages from the gods, rather than natural phenomena governed by mathematical laws. The mathematical knowledge developed for practical purposes such as land surveying and taxation would be sophisticated but limited in scope, lacking the abstract theoretical framework that allows modern mathematics to describe the underlying structure of reality. The medical knowledge that governs treatment of illness and injury would combine practical remedies that actually work with magical thinking and religious ritual that might do more harm than good. The physicians who serve the wealthy and powerful would have access to surgical instruments made from bronze and obsidian, allowing them to perform simple operations such as setting broken bones or removing foreign objects from wounds. However, their understanding of anatomy and physiology would be limited to what could be observed externally, leading to treatments that seem logical but are actually ineffective or dangerous. The common people would rely primarily on folk remedies and herbal preparations that have been passed down through generations, some of which contain active ingredients that provide real benefits while others are useless or harmful. The geographical knowledge that shapes understanding of the wider world would be limited to the immediate region and the trade routes that connect Mesopotamia to neighboring civilizations. The maps available would be crude and inaccurate, based on the reports of travelers and merchants who may have had their own reasons for exaggerating or minimizing the distances and dangers involved in long-distance travel. The existence of distant lands and peoples would be known primarily through legend and hearsay, creating a worldview that is both narrow and distorted. The ocean that lies beyond the known world would be seen as a mysterious and dangerous realm inhabited by monsters and spirits, rather than as a vast expanse of water that connects all the continents of the earth. The communication systems that allow information to spread throughout the region would be slow and unreliable, dependent on human messengers who travel on foot or by boat along dangerous routes. The messages they carry would be written on clay tablets that are heavy and fragile, making long-distance communication expensive and difficult. The languages and scripts used for official communication would be different from those used in daily life, creating barriers that prevent important information from reaching the people who need it most. The rumors and gossip that supplement official communications would be unreliable and often contradictory, making it difficult to separate truth from fiction in a world where accurate information is crucial for survival. The entertainment and cultural activities that provide relief from the hardships of daily life would be simple and communal, based on traditions that have been passed down through generations without significant change. The stories told by professional storytellers would be epic tales of heroes and gods, filled with adventure and moral lessons, but lacking the psychological complexity and individual character development that modern audiences expect. The music, performed on simple instruments, would be haunting and beautiful, but limited in range and complexity, unable to express the full emotional spectrum that modern composers can achieve with their sophisticated instruments and theoretical knowledge. The games and sports that provide recreation would be physical and competitive, designed to build strength and skill that might be useful in warfare or daily work. The board games played by the wealthy would be complex and strategic, requiring intelligence and planning, but lacking the abstract mathematical elegance of modern games. The athletic competitions that mark religious festivals would be brutal and dangerous, with participants risking serious injury or death for the honor of victory and the favor of the gods. The gambling that accompanies these events would be based on superstition and luck rather than mathematical probability, creating opportunities for exploitation and financial ruin. The artistic traditions that express the values and beliefs of the culture would be formal and ritualistic, governed by religious conventions that limit individual creativity and expression. The sculptures and reliefs that decorate temples and palaces would be magnificent but stylized, representing idealized forms rather than realistic portrayals of actual people. The paintings and decorations that brighten the homes of the wealthy would be colorful and elaborate, but limited in subject matter to themes approved by religious and political authorities. The crafts that provide functional objects for daily use would be skilled and beautiful, but constrained by traditional techniques and materials that have not changed for centuries. The philosophical and ethical systems that guide moral behavior would be based on religious law and social custom rather than abstract principles of right and wrong. The concept of individual rights and personal freedom would be largely unknown, replaced by a system of obligations and duties that bind each person to their family, community, and social class. The justice that governs legal proceedings would be harsh and unforgiving, based on the principle of retribution rather than rehabilitation or prevention. The mercy that might temper justice would depend on the whims of rulers and judges rather than established legal principles that protect the innocent and ensure fair treatment for all. The innovation and technological development that might improve living conditions would be slow and incremental, constrained by religious conservatism and social resistance to change. The tools and techniques that have served previous generations would be considered sacred and unchangeable, making it difficult to introduce improvements that might ease the burden of daily work. The skilled craftsmen who might develop new methods and materials would be discouraged from experimenting by guild regulations and social pressure to maintain traditional standards. The knowledge that might lead to breakthrough discoveries would be scattered and unorganized, lacking the systematic approach that allows modern science to build upon previous achievements. The international relationships that affect daily life would be unstable and dangerous, with constant threats of invasion, tribute demands, and trade disruptions that could devastate the local economy. The diplomatic skills required to navigate these complex relationships would be the exclusive province of the royal court and the priesthood, leaving common people vulnerable to decisions made by distant rulers who may not understand or care about their needs. The military alliances that provide protection would be temporary and unreliable, subject to change based on the shifting balance of power and the personal ambitions of individual leaders. The environmental degradation that results from intensive agriculture and urbanization would be creating long-term problems that threaten the sustainability of the civilization itself. The irrigation systems that make agriculture possible would be slowly poisoning the soil with salt deposits that accumulate over time, reducing crop yields and forcing farmers to work ever harder to maintain their standard of living. The forests that provide timber and fuel would be disappearing as the population grows and the demand for building materials increases. The wildlife that once provided supplementary food and raw materials would be retreating before the advance of human settlement, creating a less diverse and more fragile ecosystem. The demographic pressures that result from population growth would be straining the resources available to support human life, creating competition for land, water, and food that leads to conflict and social instability. The young people who cannot find opportunities in agriculture or traditional crafts would be drawn to cities where they face unemployment, poverty, and social problems that threaten the stability of the entire society. The elderly who can no longer work would become burdens on their families, creating intergenerational tensions that strain the social fabric. The sick and disabled who cannot contribute to the economic life of the community would be marginalized and neglected, creating a culture that values productivity above compassion. As our journey through ancient Mesopotamia draws to a close, we can see that the challenges facing someone transported to this distant time and place would be overwhelming and perhaps insurmountable. The physical demands of daily life would test the limits of human endurance, while the social and cultural barriers would make it difficult to find a meaningful place in the community. The constant threats from disease, warfare, and natural disasters would create a level of anxiety and uncertainty that would be difficult for modern people to endure. The lack of individual freedom and personal choice would be stifling to those accustomed to the liberties that we take for granted in our modern world. Yet there is also something to be admired in the resilience and determination of the people who built the first cities and created the foundations of human civilization. Their ability to work together to overcome the challenges of their environment, to develop complex systems of government and law, and to create works of art and literature that still inspire us today demonstrates the fundamental strength and creativity of the human spirit. Their lives, though difficult and often short, were filled with purpose and meaning that came from their deep connection to their families, their communities, and their gods. As you settle deeper into your comfortable bed tonight, surrounded by the conveniences and protections of modern life, let yourself feel grateful for the long journey that humanity has taken from those ancient cities to the world we inhabit today. Feel your body relax into the soft mattress, your muscles releasing the tensions of the day as you breathe in the clean, cool air of your climate-controlled room. Let the gentle sounds of the modern world fade away as you drift toward sleep, carrying with you the knowledge that you are part of a great continuity of human experience that stretches back through millennia. To those first brave souls who dared to build permanent settlements in the valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, close your eyes now and let the peaceful darkness embrace you, knowing that tomorrow you will wake to a world of possibilities that those ancient people could never have imagined, yet feeling connected to them through the shared experience of being human in a vast and mysterious universe. Sleep well, dear listener, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle rustling of palm fronds in a warm breeze, the soft murmur of ancient rivers flowing eternally toward the sea, and the profound peace that comes from understanding your place in the long story of human civilization.